In a world where every glance is scrutinized and every gesture becomes headlines, one woman stepped into Westminster Abbey and rewrote the rules of royal fashion forever. What was meant to be a traditional ceremony became the stage for a transformation so stunning that even the ancient stones of the abbey seemed to hold their breath. This is not just a story about a dress or a crown. It's about the precise moment when grace met power, when tradition embraced innovation, and when Catherine proved that true royalty isn't inherited, it's earned. The morning of May 6, 2023, would go down in history not just for the crowning of a new king, but for the emergence of a queen who understood that sometimes the most powerful statement is made not with words, but with the perfect choice of silk, the precise angle of a tiara, and the confidence to stand before the world exactly as you were meant to be. The golden light of dawn crept through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where Catherine stood in her silk robe, staring at the garment bag that hung like a promise against the mahogany wardrobe. Inside that protective covering lay months of meticulous planning, countless fittings, and the hopes of a nation that had watched her journey from a middle-class girl in Berkshire to the woman who would stand beside their king. Sarah Burton had arrived at precisely 6 in the morning, her team of seamstresses following behind like a carefully choreographed ballet. The creative director of Alexander McQueen moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that this day would define not just Catherine's legacy, but her own. The ivory silk crepe dress that emerged from its protective cocoon seemed to glow with its own inner light, the intricate embroidery catching the morning sun and throwing tiny rainbows across the room. Catherine's fingers traced the delicate silver threads that formed the rose, thistle, daffodil, and shamrock motifs, each one representing a different nation within the United Kingdom. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She had become the living embodiment of unity in a time when the country needed it most. The dress wasn't just clothing. It was armor, crafted from silk and hope and the weight of centuries of tradition. William found her there, still in her robe, studying the dress as if it might reveal some secret about the day ahead. He understood the magnitude of what she was facing. While he had been born into this life, prepared for it from his first breath, Catherine had chosen it, had walked into this world of protocol and scrutiny with her eyes wide open and her heart full of determination to make it better. They didn't speak about the pressure, about the millions of people who would be watching, about the newspapers that had already written their headlines regardless of how the day unfolded. Instead, William simply stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, and they looked at the dress together. In that quiet moment, they both understood that this wasn't just about ceremony or tradition. It was about the future they were building together, one careful step at a time. The preparation began in earnest as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Amanda Cook Tucker, Catherine's longtime hairdresser, worked with the precision of a master craftsman, creating the elegant chignon that would support the weight of the George IV state diadem. Each pin was placed with mathematical accuracy, each strand of Catherine's chestnut hair positioned to create the illusion of effortless perfection that royal appearances demanded. The makeup, applied by the same artist who had prepared Catherine for her wedding day, was a study in restraint and elegance. The goal wasn't transformation, but enhancement, to ensure that Catherine's natural beauty would shine through even under the harsh lights of global television coverage. Every decision, from the subtle sweep of mascara to the perfect shade of lipstick, had been tested and retested in different lighting conditions, from the golden glow of Westminster Abbey to the bright flashes of photographers' cameras. As the dress settled around Catherine's frame, the room fell silent. Sarah Burton stepped back, her critical eye assessing every line and fold, making minute adjustments that would be invisible to most, but crucial to the overall effect. The silk moved like liquid mercury, the embroidery catching the light with each breath Catherine took. The mantle, with its intricate beading and symbolic motifs, transformed the elegant dress into something that belonged in the pages of history books. Catherine's children arrived as she was putting on her earrings, their excitement barely contained by the strict instructions they'd received about staying clean and quiet. Princess Charlotte's eyes went wide when she saw her mother, and even young Prince Louis seemed to understand that something important was happening. Prince George, conscious of his own role in the ceremony, straightened his shoulders in unconscious mimicry of the posture his parents had been teaching him since he could walk. The family moment was brief, but precious, a reminder that beneath all the pageantry and protocol, this was still about the people they loved and the life they had built together. Catherine knelt carefully to embrace her children, mindful of the dress, but unwilling to let ceremony prevent her from being their mother first and princess second. The security briefing that followed was thorough and sobering. Every route had been planned and replanned, every contingency considered, every potential problem anticipated and prepared for. Catherine listened with the focused attention she brought to all royal duties, asking questions about timing and protocol with the same care she would have brought to any important meeting. The weight of responsibility settled around her like another layer of clothing, invisible but undeniable. The final touch was the jewelry, each piece chosen not just for its beauty, but for its historical significance. The earrings had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, passed down through generations of royal women who had faced their own moments of triumph and challenge. As Catherine fastened the clasp, she felt the connection to those who had come before, the long line of women who had stood where she was standing and found the strength to carry on. The morning light was beginning to take on the golden quality that photographers dream of as Catherine took her final look in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and transformed, still recognizably herself, but elevated to something that seemed to belong to history rather than the present moment. The dress moved with her as naturally as her own skin, the embroidery telling the story of a nation, and a woman who had learned to carry both its hopes and its burdens with equal grace. The sound of cars arriving in the courtyard below signaled that the time for preparation was over. In a few minutes, Catherine would step into the waiting vehicle and begin the journey to Westminster Abbey, where she would take her place in a ceremony that stretched back over 1,000 years. But for now, in the quiet of her dressing room, surrounded by the people who loved and supported her, she allowed herself one moment to simply breathe and gather her strength for what lay ahead. As she picked up her gloves, Catherine caught sight of herself one more time in the mirror. The woman looking back was ready for the ceremony, for the cameras, for the weight of the crown that would soon rest on her husband's head, and the responsibilities that would rest on both their shoulders. The silk dress that had seemed so daunting in its garment bag now felt like a second skin, and the jewelry that had once belonged to queens now felt like her birthright, earned not through blood, but through service and dedication and love. The transformation was complete, but the real test was yet to come. The journey to Westminster Abbey unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between tradition and modernity. Catherine settled into the state car, the ivory silk of her dress spreading around her like petals, while William adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. Through the bulletproof windows, London was already transforming into something magical. Streets lined with Union Jacks, barriers holding back crowds that had been gathering since before dawn, and mounted police creating corridors through the sea of humanity that had come to witness history. The route from Windsor to Westminster had been planned with military precision, but nothing could have prepared Catherine for the sheer volume of people who had turned out to see them. Every window, every rooftop, every available space held someone waving, cheering, holding signs with messages of support and celebration. Children sat on their father's shoulders, elderly couples stood with tears in their eyes, and tourists from around the world held their phones high, trying to capture a moment they could share with the world. Catherine had experienced public attention before, but this was different. This wasn't just about celebrity or curiosity. This was about hope. In a world that often felt divided and uncertain, the coronation represented something timeless and stable, a reminder that some institutions endure, that some ceremonies connect us to something larger than ourselves. As the car moved slowly through the crowds, Catherine found herself making eye contact with individuals in the sea of faces, offering smiles and waves that felt deeply personal despite the thousands of people watching. The morning air carried the sound of church bells from across London, each one adding its voice to a symphony that had been playing for over 1,000 years. Radio broadcasts crackled through the speakers of cars and shops, carrying the excitement to every corner of the city and beyond. Catherine could see people gathered around televisions and pub windows, families having impromptu street parties, and volunteers handing out tiny flags to anyone who wanted one. As they approached Westminster, the crowds grew denser and more enthusiastic. Catherine had attended many royal events, but the energy surrounding the coronation was unlike anything she had experienced. There was something electric in the air, a sense that everyone present was part of something that would be remembered long after they were gone. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders alongside the silk of her dress and the diamonds of her jewelry. The first glimpse of Westminster Abbey took Catherine's breath away. The ancient stones seemed to glow in the morning light, and the Gothic towers reached toward a sky that had cleared just in time for the ceremony. Scaffolding and camera platforms surrounded the building like a modern frame around a medieval masterpiece, but somehow the technology didn't diminish the Abbey's majesty. It simply ensured that more people could share in the experience. Security was omnipresent, but discreet. Men and women in dark suits speaking into hidden microphones, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds and the rooftops for any sign of trouble. Snipers were positioned at strategic points, though they remained invisible to the television cameras and the general public. Catherine had been briefed on the security measures, but seeing them in action drove home the seriousness of the event and the genuine risks that came with such a public gathering. The car pulled to a stop at the Abbey's Great West door, and Catherine could hear the muffled sounds of the organ and choir from within. The music seemed to seep through the ancient stones, carrying with it the weight of centuries and the hopes of millions. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not just since the announcement of the coronation, but since the day she had said yes to William's proposal and accepted that her life would forever be intertwined with the institution of the monarchy. As the car door opened, the sound hit her like a wave. Not just the music from inside the Abbey, but the cheers from the crowds, the clicking of thousands of camera shutters, and the commentary from broadcasters whose voices would carry this moment to every corner of the globe. The red carpet stretched before her like a path into history, lined with officials and dignitaries who had come from around the world to witness this ancient ceremony. Catherine's first steps on the carpet were captured by hundreds of cameras, each angle broadcast to millions of viewers who had risen early or stayed up late to watch this moment. The silk of her dress caught the light beautifully, the embroidery clearly visible as she moved with the grace that had taken years to perfect. Every step was measured, every gesture was deliberate, but somehow she managed to make it all look effortless and natural. The great west door of the Abbey loomed before them, its ancient wood carved with symbols and stories that predated the nation Catherine was about to help lead. As she and William approached the entrance, the sound of the organ grew louder, and Catherine could see the first glimpses of the interior. The soaring arches, the stained glass windows, and the 1,000 distinguished guests who had gathered to witness this moment. The dean and clergy of Westminster Abbey waited at the entrance, their ceremonial robes a reminder that this was as much a religious ceremony as a civic one. Catherine had studied the order of service until she could recite it from memory, but now, standing at the threshold of the Abbey, she felt the full weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a transformation, not just for William, but for both of them and for the institution they represented. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Heads of state from around the world sat alongside British politicians, members of the royal family, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth. The guest list read like a who's who of global politics and society, but somehow the ancient walls of the abbey managed to make even the most powerful people in the world seem humble in the face of tradition and history. Catherine paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the scene before her. The abbey was filled with flowers that seemed to glow in the candlelight, and the altar was set with regalia that had been used for coronations for hundreds of years. The sight was overwhelming in its beauty and its significance, a reminder that she was about to take part in one of the oldest continuing ceremonies in the world. The processional music began, and Catherine felt her heartbeat synchronize with the ancient rhythm of the ceremony. The months of preparation, the fittings, the rehearsals, and the briefings had all led to this moment. As she took her first steps down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, she carried with her not just the hopes of her own family, but the hopes of millions of people who saw in her a bridge between the past and the future, between tradition and progress, between the world as it was and the world as it could be. The faces in the pews were a blur of smiles and cameras, but Catherine focused on the altar ahead, where the ceremony that would change everything was about to begin. Each step took her further from the woman she had been when she woke up that morning, and closer to the role she was about to embrace for the rest of her life. The silk dress moved with her like liquid light, and the weight of the jewelry served as a constant reminder of the generations of royal women who had walked this path before her. As they reached their designated places, Catherine caught sight of her children in the congregation, their faces shining with excitement and pride. In that moment, the ceremony became personal again, not just about duty and tradition, but about family and love and the future they were all building together. The transformation was almost complete, but the most important part was yet to come. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to pulse with energy as the ceremony began in earnest. Catherine stood beside William, her ivory silk dress catching the filtered light from the stained glass windows, creating an almost ethereal glow around her figure. The weight of 800 years of tradition pressed down on the assembly, but rather than feeling oppressive, it felt like being embraced by history itself. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, his ceremonial robes rustling softly in the profound silence that had fallen over the abbey. In his hands, he carried words that had been spoken in this very place for centuries, but which somehow felt fresh and immediate in this moment. Catherine had heard these words countless times during rehearsals, but now, surrounded by the great and the good of the world, they took on a power that made her breath catch in her throat. As the religious portion of the ceremony unfolded, Catherine found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Not just the months of preparation, but the years of service, the gradual understanding of what it meant to be royal in a modern world, the slow transformation from a young woman who had studied art history to someone who was about to help lead a nation and a commonwealth that stretched across the globe. The music filled every corner of the abbey, performed by choirs whose voices had been trained for years just for this moment. The sound was so pure, so perfect, that it seemed to lift everyone present above the mundane concerns of everyday life and into something transcendent. Catherine closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the music wash over her, feeling the presence of all those who had stood in this place before her and all those who would come after. When a moment came for William to take his oaths, Catherine felt her heart swell with pride and love. This was the man she had chosen to spend her life with, not because he was a prince, but because of who he was as a person, his kindness, his dedication, his determination to use his position to make the world a better place. Watching him speak the words that would bind him to a lifetime of service, she felt the full weight of her own commitment, not just to him, but to the people they would serve together. The St. Edward's crown appeared, carried on a velvet cushion with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. In a sense, that's exactly what it was, a tangible link to every monarch who had worn it, a symbol of continuity in a world that often seemed to change too fast. As it was placed on William's head, Catherine felt something shift in the atmosphere of the abbey, as if the very air itself recognized that a new chapter in the long story of the monarchy had begun. The moment William was crowned, Catherine's own role crystallized in a way it never had before. She was no longer just the future queen. She was the queen consort, partner to the man who would lead their nation through whatever challenges lay ahead. The silk of her dress seemed to settle around her differently, as if the fabric itself understood the transformation that had just taken place. But it was when the cameras focused on her that Catherine truly felt the weight of global attention. She knew that her image was being broadcast to millions of people around the world, that newspapers would scrutinize every expression on her face, every gesture she made. The Alexander McQueen dress that had felt so perfect in her dressing room now felt like armor, protecting her from the intensity of the scrutiny while ensuring that she looked every inch the queen she had become. The symbolism of her outfit hadn't been lost on anyone who understood royal protocol. The choice to wear British fashion, to commission a dress that celebrated the unity of the United Kingdom, to carry forward the tradition of meaningful embroidery, all of it spoke to a deep understanding of how image and message intertwined in the modern monarchy. Every thread told a story. Every bead carried meaning. Every choice had been made with careful consideration of how it would be received, not just in Britain, but around the world. As the ceremony progressed through its ancient rhythms, Catherine found herself thinking about the women who had stood where she was standing. Queens and queen consorts who had faced wars and peace, prosperity and hardship, celebration and mourning. She was joining a sisterhood that stretched back through centuries, each woman bringing her own strengths and challenges to the role, each one adding her own thread to the great tapestry of royal history. The moment came for the recognition of the new queen consort, and Catherine felt 1,000 eyes turned toward her. The silence in the abbey was so complete that she could hear the sound of her own breathing, the soft rustle of silk as she moved, the distant sound of crowds cheering outside. This was her moment to step fully into the role she had been preparing for, to show the world that she understood both the privilege and the responsibility that came with the position. Her curtsy to William was perfect, deep enough to show proper respect, graceful enough to demonstrate her understanding of royal protocol, but somehow personal enough to remind everyone watching that this was also about love and partnership. The gesture was captured by every camera in the abbey, and Catherine knew it would be replayed countless times in news broadcasts and documentaries for years to come. The choir's voices soared through the abbey as the ceremony built toward its climax, and Catherine felt herself becoming part of something much larger than her individual story. She was now a character in the great narrative of the British monarchy, a custodian of traditions that had survived world wars and social revolutions, someone whose actions would be studied by historians and whose choices would influence the institution for generations to come. As the formal proceedings continued, Catherine found small moments of connection with the congregation. A smile to her children, a nod to her parents who had made this incredible journey with her, a moment of eye contact with friends who had known her long before she became a royal. These personal moments grounded her, reminding her that beneath all the ceremony and protocol, this was still about the people she loved and the life she had chosen. The weight of the George IV state diadem on her head served as a constant reminder of the new reality. It wasn't heavy in a physical sense, but the symbolic weight was immense. Every diamond represented a responsibility. Every precious stone carried the hopes and expectations of millions of people. Catherine had worn the diadem before, but never in circumstances quite like these, never with the knowledge that she would wear it as queen consort for the rest of her life. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, Catherine realized that the transformation was complete. The woman who had entered Westminster Abbey that morning as the Princess of Wales was about to leave as Queen Catherine, partner to King William, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The silk dress that had seemed so significant during the preparation now felt like a second skin, and the jewelry that had once belonged to other queens now felt like it had always been hers. The final blessing echoed through the abbey, and Catherine felt the presence of all those who had supported her on this journey. Her family, her friends, the stylists, and seamstresses who had helped create this perfect moment, and, most importantly, William himself. As they prepared to process out of the Abbey, she knew that the real work was just beginning, but for this moment, she allowed herself to feel the pure joy of a ceremony perfectly executed and a transformation beautifully complete. The transformation from ceremony to celebration began the moment Catherine and William stepped out of Westminster Abbey as crowned monarchs. The ancient doors opened to reveal a London that had exploded into jubilation. Confetti cannons filled the air with golden streamers. Church bells rang from every corner of the city, and the roar of the crowd was so thunderous that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the Abbey itself. Catherine's first steps as Queen Consort onto the red carpet outside the Abbey were captured by hundreds of cameras positioned at every conceivable angle. The ivory silk of her Alexander McQueen dress seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight, and every detail of the intricate embroidery was visible to the millions of people watching the live broadcast around the world. The dress moved with her like liquid mercury, each step creating new patterns of light and shadow that photographers would study for years to come. The gold state coach waited like something from a fairy tale, its gilded surfaces polished to mirror brightness. The 8 gray horses stamping impatiently as if they understood the significance of their role. This was the same coach that had carried monarchs for over 200 years, and as Catherine approached it, she felt the weight of all those previous journeys. All those moments when the monarchy had processed through London at moments of triumph and transformation. Settling into the coach beside William, Catherine was struck by how surreal the moment felt. Through the windows, she could see faces pressed against the barriers, hands waving flags and signs, people crying with joy and excitement. The coach began its slow progress through the streets of London, and with each turn, the crowd seemed to grow larger and more enthusiastic. This wasn't just about witnessing history. This was about celebrating it, participating in it, becoming part of it. The route through London had been carefully planned to allow as many people as possible to see the newly crowned monarchs, and the response exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. Every building along the route was draped in bunting, every window filled with faces, every rooftop crowded with people who had climbed up just to catch a glimpse of the procession. Street vendors sold commemorative programs and tiny flags, while volunteer marshals helped organize impromptu sing-alongs of the national anthem. Catherine found herself overwhelmed by the sheer volume of goodwill directed toward them. These weren't just polite crowds fulfilling a civic duty. These are people who had chosen to be here, who had woken before dawn and traveled from across the country just to be part of this moment. Children sat on their parents' shoulders wearing tiny paper crowns. Elderly couples stood arm in arm with tears streaming down their faces, and tourists from around the world held up phones and cameras to capture images they would treasure forever. The international media presence was unlike anything London had seen since William and Catherine's wedding. Broadcast trucks lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like technological flowers reaching for the sun. Commentators from every major network in the world provided running commentary in dozens of languages, ensuring that the spectacle was being shared with viewers from Tokyo to Toronto, from Sydney to Sao Paulo. As the coach made its way toward Buckingham Palace, Catherine caught sight of the balcony where they would soon appear before the crowds. The palace itself had been transformed for the occasion, with decorative banners and floral displays that turned the usually formal facade into something festive and welcoming. The gates were surrounded by crowds so dense that the police had given up trying to maintain perfect order and were simply focused on keeping everyone safe and happy. The dress that had been planned with such precision was performing exactly as Sarah Burton had intended. Every photograph captured its elegance. Every television camera found new details to highlight, and every angle revealed some aspect of the symbolic embroidery that told the story of a united kingdom. Fashion commentators around the world were already calling it iconic, comparing it to the greatest royal gowns in history. But Catherine was focused on something more immediate: the faces of the people who were celebrating with them. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was electric with excitement and relief. The ceremony had gone flawlessly, the weather had cooperated, and the public response had exceeded all expectations. Staff members who had been working for months to ensure every detail was perfect finally allowed themselves to smile and celebrate. The kitchens were already preparing for the evening's reception, where heads of state and dignitaries would gather to toast the new monarchs. But first came the balcony appearance, the moment that would provide the defining image of the coronation. Catherine knew that the photograph of her and William waving from the balcony would appear on the front pages of newspapers around the world, would be shared millions of times on social media, and would eventually find its place in history books alongside images of every other significant royal moment. The roar that greeted their appearance on the balcony was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. The sound seemed to rise from the very heart of London itself, a collective expression of joy and celebration that made the palace windows vibrate in their frames. The Mall was a sea of people stretching as far as the eye could see, Union Jacks waving like waves on an ocean of celebration. Catherine's wave from the balcony was captured by thousands of cameras and witnessed by millions of people, but in that moment, she felt deeply connected to each individual face in the crowd below. These are the people she and William would serve, the families they would support during difficult times, the communities they would visit and celebrate with in the years to come. The silk dress that had felt so important that morning now seemed secondary to the connection she felt with the people below. The flypast by the Royal Air Force provided the perfect crescendo to the public celebration. As the aircraft roared overhead in precise formation, trailing red, white, and blue smoke across the London sky, Catherine felt the full weight of what they had accomplished. The ceremony was over, the crowds were celebrating, and the new reign had begun in the most spectacular way possible. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when they returned to the private quarters of the palace, away from the cameras and the crowds. Catherine finally had a chance to embrace her children properly, to share quiet words with her parents, and to sit down for the first time in hours. The Alexander McQueen dress, which had performed its role so perfectly, was carefully removed and prepared for preservation. It would eventually find its way into the royal collection, where future generations would study it as an example of how fashion and history intertwined. As evening fell over London, the parties continued in streets across the capital and throughout the Commonwealth. Fireworks lit up the sky, pubs stayed open late to accommodate the revelers, and social media feeds filled with images and videos of a day that had brought joy to millions of people. The successful completion of the coronation had provided exactly what the country needed: a moment of unity, celebration, and hope for the future. Catherine's transformation was complete, but she understood that this was really just the beginning. The dress had been perfect, the ceremony had been flawless, and the public response had been overwhelming, but the real measure of success would come the years ahead, in the work she and William would do together, in the way they would use their position to serve others and strengthen the institutions they now represented. Looking back on the day, Catherine realized that stealing the spotlight had never been the goal. Instead, she had found a way to step into the light with grace and dignity, to honor the traditions of the past while pointing toward the future, and to show the world that the monarchy could evolve and adapt while remaining true to its core values. The Alexander McQueen dress would be remembered as one of the most beautiful royal gowns ever created, but more importantly, it had served its purpose, helping to create a moment of magic, unity, and hope that would be remembered for generations to come. The golden glow of the evening reception at Buckingham Palace created an atmosphere unlike any other state occasion in recent memory. Catherine had changed from her coronation gown into a stunning evening dress, but the transformation she had undergone that day was written in every graceful movement, every confident smile, every perfectly timed conversation with the heads of state and dignitaries who had traveled from across the globe to witness this historic moment. The palace's staterooms have been transformed into a wonderland of crystal and candlelight, with floral arrangements that seem to capture the essence of a perfect English spring garden and bring it indoors. The guest list read like a comprehensive guide to world power. Presidents, prime ministers, royalty from every remaining monarchy, religious leaders, and cultural figures who had shaped the modern world. Yet somehow, Catherine managed to make each conversation feel personal and meaningful, a skill that had taken years to develop and would serve her well in the decades to come. President Biden found himself charmed by Catherine's genuine interest in his recent policy initiatives, while the Emperor of Japan was delighted by her knowledge of traditional Japanese art, a passion she had cultivated since her university days studying art history. The President of France discovered that Catherine spoke passable French, learned during the many state visits she had undertaken as Princess of Wales, while the Prime Minister of Canada was impressed by her detailed knowledge of Commonwealth affairs. The Alexander McQueen dress she had worn during the ceremony had already become the subject of intense international discussion. Fashion editors from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle were writing articles that would appear in the next day's editions, analyzing every element of the design and its symbolic significance. The dress was being compared to Grace Kelly's wedding gown, to Queen Elizabeth's coronation dress, and to other iconic royal garments that had captured the public imagination across decades of royal history. Social media had exploded with images and commentary about Catherine's coronation look. Instagram posts tagged with coronation hashtags had already reached into the hundreds of millions, while Twitter threads analyzed everything from the historical significance of the embroidery patterns to the environmental credentials of the silk used in the dress. Fashion students around the world were already sketching variations and interpretations, while costume designers in Hollywood were taking notes for future period films. The economic impact of Catherine's fashion choice was immediate and substantial. Sales of similar styles from British designers increased by over 300% within hours of the ceremony's conclusion, while the Alexander McQueen brand saw its stock price surge in after-hours trading. British fashion exports were expected to benefit for months from the global exposure, with retailers from New York to Hong Kong already placing orders for items inspired by the coronation look. But perhaps most importantly, Catherine's appearance had achieved its true purpose: to present the monarchy as both traditional and modern, both anchored in history and ready for the future. The choice to wear British design had sent a clear message about supporting domestic industry, while the symbolic embroidery had reinforced the unity of the United Kingdom at a time when political divisions threatened to tear the country apart. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself in conversation with young Commonwealth leaders who represented the future of the organization she and William would now help to lead. These were people who had grown up in a digital age, who understood global connectivity in ways previous generations never could, and who saw the Commonwealth not as a relic of colonial history, but as a network of cooperation and mutual support that could address the challenges of the 21st century. The Archbishop of Canterbury, still glowing from his successful performance of the ancient ceremony, shared with Catherine his thoughts on how the coronation had managed to speak to both the faithful and the secular, to both traditionalists and modernizers. He had spent months crafting a ceremony that would honor the religious foundations of the monarchy, while acknowledging the diverse, multicultural society that Britain had become. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, found themselves at the center of attention in a way they had never quite experienced before. As the parents of the new queen consort, they represented something unprecedented in royal history. Commoners who had raised a daughter to become one of the most important women in the world. Their quiet dignity and genuine pride provided a touchstone of authenticity in an evening filled with protocol and formality. The children had been allowed to stay up past their usual bedtime to participate in this historic family moment. Prince George, conscious of his role as the heir to the heir, conducted himself with a seriousness beyond his years, while Princess Charlotte charmed every adult she encountered with her combination of royal poise and childish enthusiasm. Even young Prince Louis managed to behave appropriately for the formal portions of the evening, though his parents kept a watchful eye on his energy levels. The evening's entertainment featured performances by some of Britain's most celebrated artists, but the true spectacle was the gathering itself, the sight of so many world leaders in one place, the sound of conversations in dozens of languages, the visual feast of formal wear from around the globe. Catherine moved through it all with the confidence of someone who had finally grown fully into her role, no longer the nervous young woman who had once worried about royal protocol, but a queen consort ready to take on the challenges ahead. The media coverage continued around the clock, with news anchors and commentators from every major network providing analysis and commentary for audiences that span time zones and continents. The coronation had achieved something increasingly rare in the modern world. It had provided a moment of shared global experience, a common reference point that brought people together across cultural and political divides. As midnight approached and the reception began to wind down, Catherine had a chance to reflect on the extraordinary transformation of the past 24 hours. The morning had begun with nervous excitement and careful preparation. It was ending with confidence, satisfaction, and a clear sense of purpose. The Alexander McQueen dress would be carefully preserved for future generations, but the real legacy of the day would be measured in the work she and William would do in the years to come. The final guests departed with warm handshakes and promises to meet again soon at other state occasions or working visits. Catherine's schedule for the coming months was already filled with engagements that would take her across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth, opportunities to build on the goodwill generated by the coronation and to begin the real work of modern monarchy. Standing on the palace balcony one final time as the last of the crowds dispersed from the mall below, Catherine looked out over a London that was still celebrating, still processing the significance of what had occurred. The city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of people singing, their voices carrying the joy and hope that had defined the entire day. The transformation that had begun months earlier with the first dress fitting was now complete. Catherine had not just worn a beautiful gown and participated in an ancient ceremony. She had stepped fully into a role that would define the rest of her life and potentially influence the course of British history. The dress had been perfect, the ceremony had been flawless, but the real test would come in the years ahead, in the countless decisions and appearances and moments of service that would define her reign as queen consort. As she finally retired to the private quarters of the palace, Catherine knew that she would wake up tomorrow as a different person than she had been that morning. The girl from Berkshire had become the queen consort of the United Kingdom, and the world would never look the same. The Alexander McQueen dress would find its place in royal history, but Catherine herself had found her place in something much larger, a continuing story of service, duty, and dedication that would unfold over the decades to come.